My name is Jessica Harrington, Director of Career Development at the Lighthouse, and today is the first part in a 5-part webinar series. We're going to be talking about building the perfect resume. To get started, we're going to talk about what makes a good resume. Well, it's going to be free of spelling and grammatical errors. It's going to be concise. We definitely don't want to see a 20-page resume. Ideally, coming out of college, or if you're still in college, you want your resume to be 1 to 2 pages. In that resume, you're going to highlight your skills, your achievements, and your experience. You want to use that using the best language possible. So you're going to use a lot of action verbs, language that really highlights your achievements. And we'll talk about that a little bit further in a bit. We're not going to get overly personal. Your resume is a good place to highlight your skills, professional skills, your professional achievements, and academic achievements as well. But it's not really a place to get into hobbies, things like that. You also want to make sure that you're using the appropriate layout, best practices for margins, fonts, allowing white space in your resume that makes it easy for whoever is reading it to follow along the page. This is a very basic layout of how you could format your resume. You're going to have your header at the top. If you are still in college or you just graduated from VWU, your education should really be at the top. Now, once you've been working for 15 years, 10 years even, it's okay to move your education down below your experience, but initially when you're entering the job market, you want to make sure that that education is right at the top. If your GPA is above a 3.0, you want to include it. And then you can include relevant coursework, honors, and awards relating to your education. Then you can, you're going to have sections for experience. And then you also want to mention skills or any research that you've completed as well. So what to include and what to leave off? Well, like I said, you're going to include your GPA if it's a 3.0 or higher. You want to make sure that you include experiential learning. Did you complete some research? Were you working as a research assistant, perhaps? Did you spend a semester in Spain? Did you complete an internship with NATO? There's so many different things that you may have completed that you can add to that resume that really highlight, the breadth of your experiences. For your work experience, you want to make sure that you're including 3 to 5 bullet points. For each experience, highlighting your achievements and talking a little bit about what you did. Also, if you are involved in extracurricular activities, it is more than okay to include a section on that. Say you're the president of a student organization or in a leadership role. Or say you volunteer with Habitat for Humanity or anything else really. These are all good things to include on your resume. Things that you're going to want to leave off. Excluding maybe college freshmen, I really feel it's best if you leave your high school education off. You also don't need to include your references on your resume. That should be a separate document. I will talk a little bit about what your reference page should look like, just because, I think it's still important to discuss that, but it's not something that goes on your actual resume, and you don't need to say at the bottom, references available upon request. It is assumed, and you don't need to say that. Another thing to leave off is the objective. Also, essentially, it's assumed. If you're applying for a analyst position with a company and you say my objective is to obtain an analyst position, well, they kind of know that already because you're applying for the job. What is a great replacement for that is a cover letter. It gives you a better chance to talk about yourself a little bit more personally and kind of really focus in on some of those achievements that you've accomplished. You're going to leave off your GPA if it's under 3.0. We're going to leave off random hobbies. I really enjoy gardening, but I am not putting that on my resume. Another thing to leave off are mundane tasks. We will talk about that a little bit more in a bit, but you know, I don't need to hear that you spent your day filing and answering phones. There's a better way to word that. And if you say you work somewhere for a week and you hated your job and you said this isn't for me and you stopped working there, or you know, something along those lines, just leave it off if you work somewhere for a week. It's better to not even highlight that than to have to explain why you were there, you know, for such a short period of time. Likely if you had a bad experience or you know, didn't stick around somewhere, you probably don't want them contacting that employer as a reference anyway. So you're better off just leaving it off. Now, that said, there are short-term experiences that you want to include. Say you completed a 3-week-long externship somewhere. It is totally acceptable to include that. Just make sure that you know, include that it is an externship. And last but not least, do not put your photo on your resume. There are a lot of templates that are floating around at this point that include a spot for a photo. I will tell you that, you know, for the most part, if an employer sees your photo on a resume that you submit, they are either going to send it back to you and ask you to resubmit it without your photo, or they're not even going to look at it. It has to do with potential liability for the employer in terms of discrimination, and so they don't really want your photo on there. Of course, there's exceptions to every rule, and you know, in this case, say you're applying to be a news anchor and they ask you to include your photo, then that might be acceptable. You know, something like that. If you're applying to model or, you know, act or something like that, then of course, you know, that's the exception. But for the vast majority of positions, you know, if you're applying to be a technical writer somewhere, they probably don't care what you look like. So what we do care about how things look is how your resume is formatted. Templates are very popular. I will tell you that I prefer using just a Word document or a Google Doc, creating just a basic resume that isn't in template form. And we'll talk a little bit more about why templates are an issue for ATS systems, applicant tracking software, in a little bit. But in addition to that, sometimes templates can be very difficult to read, and if your experience doesn't match the exact template format, it can be really difficult to work with. So really, it's better just to, you know, keep a simple format where you're just going down the page and listing your education experience. You can use color on a resume. Just avoid, you know, hot pink and neon green. You know, keep with professional colors, navy, maroon, charcoal gray, things like that. Those are great colors to use in a resume. And you can add, you know, that color in your header, in various section headers, and then, you know, if you want to add a little color to your bullet points, that's totally acceptable. But don't use colors that are really difficult to read. I probably wouldn't suggest using like a background color or anything like that. You know, just simple white backgrounds, and colors that are, you know, still dark enough that it's easy for someone, you know, reading it over to actually read what's on there. Your margins should be between 3/4 of an inch and 1 inch, preferably. You don't want 2-inch margins. You also don't want 1/4 inch margins. couple reasons. One, it can make your page look really crowded if you're trying to just cram everything into a page. It's better to have appropriate sized margins and go into 2 pages rather than try to cram everything in. You also want to make sure that you're using action-based language, and make sure that your resume is proofread. And on that note, watch your tenses in your resume. If you were working somewhere and you're no longer there, make sure that you're switching those bullet points over to past tense. Manage inventory should be changed to managed inventory. It's a small detail, but it's still important to include that. So here's an example of what your header can look like. Your name should be a little bit bigger than everything else. You want to include your phone number. You can include your full address, but you really don't have to. Just your city, state, and zip code is fine. An email, a professional email, your Virginia Wesleyan email is totally acceptable to use. Just keep in mind, if you are applying after graduation, that your email is available to you for a year after graduation. So, at that point, it may be better to create a professional email that is going to last a little bit longer. You can also include a link to your LinkedIn. If you have a portfolio, this is also a great place to include a link for that. So, when I talk about action words, using the appropriate language, things like that, here's some examples of that kind of language. We want to use words that kind of highlight what you have accomplished at whatever job, internship, educational opportunity that you've had. So, instead of saying organized files, you could say, streamlined companies' filing system to create a system that was more efficient and, more accessible. Something like that. Something that really highlights what you did instead of just sounding like you're listing off tasks. So here's another example of how you can do that. Say you did data entry somewhere. Enter data in computer system. Or we can say, accurately and efficiently recorded data into company's reporting database. So I'm saying the same exact thing, but one sounds way more professional, way more like you were accomplishing something. So just be aware of your language, how you word things. Don't just list, watched children, when you worked at a summer camp. Supervised children ages 5 through 10, ensuring their safety and designing educational programming, something like that. So getting back to references, I said I would mention a little bit about that. You're not going to, again, list those on your actual resume. Do not include that little sentence saying references available upon request. But you are going to create a document that matches the formatting of your resume. I suggest using the same header for your resume, your cover letter, and your references page. Your references should definitely be limited to 1 page. No one needs to call 10 references. And if for some reason somebody does, they will specify that, and then, that's a separate situation. But in general, 3 to 5 references is really the best way to go. Professional references are always going to be better than personal references. Professional reference can be, a former supervisor. It's also okay to ask a professor if they would be willing to provide a reference. Say, you worked with someone at the university like me, for instance. I'm always happy to provide a reference, if I'm able to, if we've worked together in that capacity. So, say you've only had maybe 1 internship and you just can't think of another professional reference to include. It is okay to include a personal reference as well, but I suggest maybe like a family friend or, someone along those lines, rather than, someone like your mom or your sister. When you list references, make sure that they know that you're doing so. I also suggest letting your references know what jobs you're applying for and also sending them a copy of your resume just so that they can review that, especially if it's been a while since you worked with them. And when you're listing each reference, make sure that you're including a couple different kinds of contact information. So you want to include their name, their title, the company that they're with, and then you also want to include a working phone number and an email where they can actually be reached at. A lot of reference requests are provided via email now, so if you can, you want to make sure that you include the email as well. So I want to talk a little bit about ATS, what it is and why it does actually matter. So the majority of employers these days use ATS systems, which an ATS is an applicant tracking system. It's recruiting software that companies use to track who has applied for positions and often how well of a match they are for positions. So the majority of applicant tracking systems take your resume and they score it against the actual job description, and if it's below a certain percentage, if it doesn't match, then they will get an alert saying that it's not a match, and they might not even have a chance to even look at your resume. So what I suggest doing when you're looking at a job description, and say this is a job that you really, really want, look at the keywords that come up the most in that job description. A simple way to do this is you could always copy and paste that job description into a word cloud and see what pops up the most. So you just want to make sure that if there's a lot of words that are appearing, say, I don't know, customer service comes up 8 times in a job description, then you want to make sure that customer service is somewhere in your resume as well. Getting back to templates and why it's an issue for ATS is a lot of times when you submit a template resume into an ATS system, it jumbles it, and sometimes it can completely mess with your score. It can make your resume unreadable. So I really suggest keeping with that simple format and uploading your resume into those systems as a Word file. On that note, also avoid any unusual fonts because those can get messed up when you submit into an ATS system. Also, I probably would suggest not applying to, say you really want to work for Google, don't apply for 20 jobs for Google. Apply for a few, wait to see if you hear back, and then, you can always apply for more afterward. But if you have one resume that you're allowed to upload into an ATS system, and you apply for a bunch of different jobs, it's not going to match for all of them. So if you have any questions about any of this or anything else relating to resumes, please feel free to reach out to me at jharrington@vwu.edu. You can also reach out via email or go to my Calendly link to make an appointment. Anytime you want to discuss resumes any time of the year, whether you're a current student or an alumnus, I am always happy to help. Have a great day.